Well, greetings to everybody and a happy new year to you. I'm very delighted to have today Sonia Poulton joining me to discuss the New Year's Honours List. I know she's, as an investigative journalist, might I suggest the only investigative journalist at the moment, I think, probably in the Western Hemisphere. If you don't count Julian Assange, who's also in the Western Hemisphere, but is actually locked up and has been for years because of the system. Anyway,
exactly.
That's probably another story. But let's talk about this. I thought I'd just set the scene a little bit on the honours system, if I may, before we go into the fine detail, in my view, of its corruption. We'll work out how and when the corruption sort of started. And it's my experience in life generally, it doesn't matter what the subject is, if you dig down and you go back further, you'll always find that money is always at the root. Money is always at the root of all evil, and the honour system, of course, is no different. And you can trace historically, right at the beginning, Lloyd George back to, I think it was 1911, where it became quite overtly corrupt. And of course, in his tenure of office, he was quite upfront, and he was selling gongs for cash. And there was an absolute list. There was a list, there was, you want a knighthood? Well, that's £100,000, or if you want a seat in the House of Lords, that's £200,000, so on and so forth. And they were the figures, of course, of 1911. Of course, we're dealing with much bigger numbers. And it's no secret, we all know that if you want a seat in the House of Lords, if your name is Sainsbury or anybody else you'd like to, you write a great big fat check to the Labour Party and they pop you into the House of Lords. And then there's the next runners, of course, with their knighthoods and their damehoods, some of which are bought financially, and some are bought, of course, with the celebrity support very often, or senior civil service support for government policy. So, and if those old members of society who remember Yes Minister, you'll remember Sir Humphrey and the Prime Minister working out on a completely different subject. Now, let's change the subject. Let's talk about a new chancellorship of Oxford University, or let's talk about CBEs or knighthood, etc., these kind of things. So this is how it's always been. There's nothing really new in this. But my fear, as it were, is to take you to the thinking, perhaps, of the great French economic philosopher Frédéric Bastiat, who was the master of the unseen, the economic input of the unseen. There's a lot of stuff, what you see is on the front page of the tabloids. That's what you see. But of course, it runs a lot deeper than that. So the corruption in society digs its way deeper and deeper down into the roots. And it's about influence, it's about money, it's about political capital. And of course, added to the honours system, your OBEs, your CBEs, your damehoods, your knighthoods, and your seats in the House of Lords. If you add all that together, and there's some bolt-ons to that, so they are your quangos, for example.
Right.
Do you want a nice fat quango?
Right.
And then somebody says, yes, well, I've already got a knighthood. I don't want, you can't give me two knights. Well, actually, matter of fact, technically, you can have two knighthoods. But let's say you've got your knighthood, and your knighthood to a rich businessman, generally speaking, is so to keep his wife happy, so she can be called Lady Snoopsy at the garden party, so on and so forth. So a lot of these businessmen do it because she wants one. And I have to tell you, she who must be obeyed is downstairs as I talk about this. And I tell you what, as a first generation Polish immigrant, my father-in-law was a Polish tank commander and settled here after the war. She would love to turn up to the hunt meet as Lady Godfrey Bloom, and she pretends she wouldn't, but she would. And so consequently, we all have our price. We all have our price. And if it's a bit of social cachet, that's fine. If it's money you're after, you say, well, it's all very well giving me a gong. I don't know if it's a gong. I don't have any money. Well, in that case, you could have a nice fat quango, of which would you believe there are 1,000? There are 1,000 quangos and they're all very highly paid of the CEOs there and pensionable. So it's all very tasty. So the whole system that we have is corrupt. Now, Britain's really clever because if it's on the continent, if it's in France, for example, it's a Swiss bank account or maybe a big envelope full of notes given to you under the clock, Gare du Nord or something like that. That's how it works. Very unsophisticated. Ours is a nod and a wink, and it's a gong. And Sonia and I are going to look at some names.
We certainly are.
To actually prove that in some spades. So that's how the whole system started. It's going on today. Sonia and I think it's an anachronism because you can't see the nod and a wink. And I think that's the problem. And we've gone through some of the names this morning, and they're shrieking off the page.
Oh, they are. And, you know, I'd just like to say is that's interesting what you say there is you can't see the nod and the wink. I think we've now reached the stage where we actually can, where things have become so transparent since COVID and people have been able to see so clearly that we've been lied to so proficiently that a lot of these names, you and I were looking at them, we were able to just go, well, that was because blah, and that was because we saw it straight away, didn't we? And so I do think things have changed, but that's fascinating what you said. I wasn't aware of half of that history. And I think it is fascinating. Do you think it started with honourable intentions, Godfrey?
Brilliant question, Sonia, because I think in part, yes, I think it probably did. How would you reward, for example, those unsung heroes? And I was approached once by a guy who did this. He was my old commanding officer from many years ago in the army. And one of the jobs he had as a deputy lieutenant, as he then was to phone up people around and say, do you know Mrs. Snodgrass, who's been working for the church and for local charity, unsung, unpaid for many years? And, you know, would she be worth an MBE?
Right.
To me, who was a sort of semi-great and the good, although a bit too maverick to ever be acknowledged as great and the good in my own small community.
Right.
So I would say, yes, she's worked selflessly, and I could give you names now. Funnily enough, one of them was an ex-BBC lady who married a local farmer years and years ago, and she works tirelessly for the good, for no reward, for the good of the community. If anybody is interested, she should have an MBE, certainly.
Right.
Certainly should. So yes, of course it was. And soldiers, of course, soldiers get your gongs. They're turning up gongs. All my medals, of course, are for turning up. None for gallantry. They're all for turning up. And of course, you can get gallantry medals as well. But again, in the army, there's unsung heroes. There's people who've worked over and above, maybe in aid of the civil power or something, that wouldn't get you a DSO or something like that if you were working in combat. But an MBE for maybe a ranker promoted major or something of that nature, or an OBE for a lieutenant colonel who's done other good work. However, of course, that also now is corrupted. You would expect somebody like that to get a gong, maybe under certain circumstances. Now he will get that gong, that MBE or that OBE as a half colonel, maybe, not a military gong. It is classified as a military OBE or a military CBE, but that's for promoting the concept of whatever it happens to be with the government at the time. So that's women in the front line, or that's transgender, that's non-denominated showers, and sort of all these kind of things. Right. Has he been a good boy? Is he a noddy dog? Is he a military noddy dog?
Right.
Because I can tell you, as an ex-military man with a particularly undistinguished record in military history, I would say, totally undistinguished, and I'm the first to admit it. However, you will not get above the rank of colonel unless you are politically correct. You have to be politically vetted. Right. Much the same way you won't get above chief inspector in the police unless you're politically vetted. So,
right, I got you.
All these things, that's your nod and a wink, and it goes on today. And I think on the broad thing, you're quite right. It started out good. It started out with its heart in the right place. I think now it's anachronism. It needs sweeping away.
Right, got you.
So we've been through that. Let's just to prove our case here to people who are skeptical perhaps about our case, but I suspect nobody watching you or me for 1 minute would be skeptical of our case, which is probably why they're watching. Let's just run through a few names
Let's
here
do that.
and see, and to prove our case with them. Of course, there would be people who could pop other names up and say, well, there is Mrs. Snodgrass, she's still there, and she's got an MBE, so it's not all bad. And of course, you might suggest the honour system is like the curate's egg. It's good in parts.
Yes, but it is good in parts, isn't it? That's the thing, is that I tend to agree with what you're saying, is that if I was in charge of the honour system, I would definitely, I think there is a place for it. And I do think it is those unsung heroes. But as we're going to see, the people who appear largely on this honours list, and yes, absolutely, there will be people, that lovely people out there who will go, but yes, but this person deserved it. Yes, and hopefully we can honour some of those as well. And what's interesting is Godfrey and I are coming from quite different places in many key respects. And yet there are a number of people here that we've found some agreement with, who we equally find repugnant and compromised about why they've been given some award. And some people, of course, are already knights, and they've been given a lift up, haven't they, where they've got a higher honour. So that has happened as well. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. For me personally, I had a good look at this list this morning, and to me, this list is dominated by showbiz names, net zero stooges, lockdown fanatics, sort of all-round globalists. And we know that we have a WEF king. We know that about Charles, don't we? He is a World Economic Forum king. He is not, in my opinion, a king of the people. He is absolutely, you know, he is almost responsible to other people beyond us. And I think this list reflects that largely.
Yes, and of course he makes no secret of it.
No.
It has WEF fingerprints all over it. And that's the thread that runs through, and it runs through everything. It runs through the honour system, it runs through promotion, and it certainly runs through all sorts of interesting things. Let's just pick off a name here that get the ball rolling on names. Let's look at Mrs. Blanc of Aviva, Amanda Blanc, who is a fascinating one. Now, funnily enough, I thought the next time we'd see her name in the newspaper would be when the police actually knocked on her door for an accusation of racism. Because just before Christmas, she came out very, very loudly and very clearly that if you were white, if you're a male, if you were a white male, you basically weren't going to get promoted. You know, yeah. She would have to sign it off personally. And in a deal like Aviva, let me tell you, Aviva is huge. It's like the civil service. It's a great big monster. It's something I know something about because I worked 40 or 50 years in the city myself. I know Aviva back to front. I know its component parts. It used to be one of those incompetently run businesses in the city. She became the chief executive in 2020, I think. And the point being there, instead of being arrested for racism, like if she'd said, if you want to promote anybody who's black, you know, I want to sign it off personally, she were being prosecuted. But white's okay, you know, that's okay because it's white.
Yeah. So, and it's that era, isn't it? And the thing is that as a mother of a mixed race child, this is just an absolute nonsense, because it suggests that, you know, black people or anybody who isn't white is incapable of rising on their own merits. So it's absolutely insulting. But you know that she's been awarded for services to business, gender equality, and net zero. I mean, these are all the things that, honestly, Godfrey, that it's like past the sick bucket right now. Just all things that I find personally, not business, of course, we need business, but gender equality and net zero. These are things that, what are you being awarded for exactly for these things? But you're right. So what she said was that she wanted to personally vet white men who were being employed, right, in senior roles, senior white male recruits. And she has been awarded a damehood for probably that, actually.
Oh, that fast-tracked her to a damehood. It fast-tracked her because we have a WEF government and a woke government.
Right.
And I read some of the quotes that she said over the years. I want to sort of kick sexism out of the city and all that sort of thing. I left the city as a chief executive of a life assurance company. I was on the investment side always in many ways, but and that's neither here nor there. But I finished, which was part of a very big, very well-known international investment bank. And the days of getting rid of sexism in the city have long gone. They went in the late 1980s. It's just gone. And when I was on the investment floor in the early 90s of a major investment house, you could be sure that round about 35 to 40% of the investment managers were female. And of course, that would have increased over the years because that's the kind of field that women don't often gravitate to. They tend to gravitate to other forms of professions. That's just a statement of fact because that's what they prefer to do. Not everybody wants to be in the financial service industry.
No, no.
But it's certainly not a male preserve.
No, it's a regressive attitude, actually, really regressive. I came up in music journalism, which was extremely male dominated, but it didn't stop me. And so if you are determined to succeed in your chosen field, you will do so. Right, you will literally do so. It's so regressive to suggest just because we're females that we're not going to succeed or that we need quotas.
She's actually 20 years out of date, but she's flagging herself up as being progressive. She's 20 years. My ultimate boss in the city of London, controlling 4% of the London stock market. It was called Mercury Asset Management. It was part of the Warburg Empire. It's now been absorbed by the dreaded BlackRock. By my boss, my ultimate boss was Carol Galley, one of the most powerful women in the city and therefore the world, female.
Right.
Now, I'll tell you where the sexism used to come in a bit, and I'm the first to admit it. I was on fixed interest, which was very unfashionable. So I'm sitting on the unfashionable floor. This is in the 90s. And one of my assistants would come up and say, there's a new lady on the equities desk, on the UK equities desk, pow. And of course, I would find within probably half an hour reason to actually go down to the equities floor to have a look. But I'm a bloke, But there was never any question over her ability or any female's ability.
Got you.
Sonia, it just didn't happen.
I understand.
And I totally take your point, and I totally agree with this business about color. The color of your skin should have nothing to do with anything at all in any form or any life. Meritocracy. She should have been fast tracked to a damehood by saying, we don't do woke in Aviva.
That would be great.
You will be promoted on merit and merit alone.
Yes.
And there's another thing, talking about the patronizing situation here. Barclays Bank ran a whole campaign 2 years ago. You might have seen it, difficult to avoid it. They spent millions of pounds on it. Oh, and there was about 6 or 7 or 8 faces, all black people, saying, this is Deirdre so-and-so, she's in charge of this desk, she's in charge of that. Well, the whole thing was saying, and they ran it for some time, was, look, we're Barclays Bank. We put black people in management positions.
Yes. Yeah. It shouldn't need acknowledging, just do it. And also, by the way, my bank is Barclays, and they also at the same time ran a campaign which was about transgender, trans-identified males, I call them. I'm not interested in referring to men as women in any way, shape or form. But every time I opened up my Barclays app, I had a man dressed as a woman smiling at me, telling me how diverse Barclays was. I'm not interested. Just sort out my money and give me a good rate, right? As I think it was Chris Rock who said, Chris Rock, the comedian, a black comedian, and he said he's not interested in these companies who say, we're all interested in diversity. He said, just give me a decent pair of sweatpants that don't cost $50 and I'm happy. And that's kind of the reality, is we're not interested in virtue signaling companies. It's so old hat now, Godfrey. People have lost interest in it.
It's dreadful. It's embarrassing, and of course that brings us on to Welby. That brings us on to the knighthood for woke WEF Welby, who is another WEF platform man.
Yes, Archbishop of Canterbury, given the Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order, the RVO. And people say it was because he played a key role in the coronation. Of course, yes, he ensured that the WEF king was crowned. But there's so much more to Welby, I think, that has warranted his great nod from the WEF king.
Well, it's interesting, is it not, that the Anglican Commonwealth churches, which include, the very powerful churches in Africa and the Indian subcontinent, and people tend to forget that there are millions and millions and millions of Christians in the Indian subcontinent. We tend to forget a lot of this. Actually, right. We tend to think of the Anglican Church as being Lambeth Palace, some lovely old churches, some lovely old buildings, and some fantastic hymns, all of which, of course, we love. But of course, it isn't as simple as that. They've actually sacked him as the head of the Anglican Church in the Commonwealth ecclesiastical pecking order. They've got rid of him because of his woke attitude, his cherry picking of the Bible a la carte. Now, this doesn't matter whether you're a traditional Christian or not a Christian, or you're something. I'm not talking about what I'm talking about. What is his job? His job is to be boss of the Anglican Church as a Christian. I hardly ever hear him mention God, but I know his views on corporation tax,
right,
climate change,
right,
immigration,
right.
I know all his political views.
Yes,
but I've never heard him actually mention God or the spiritual life that he's supposed to lead.
I heard him mention Jesus once, and I've actually got the quote here, and I think it was so egregious. It was when they were trotting out the jab, and he said Jesus would get a vaccine. And I thought that was an absolutely abhorrent thing to do, because obviously we've got to be careful what we say on YouTube because of medical issues and all of that, and how they respond to those things. But we've seen so much information that has since come out, and I'm pretty certain Jesus wouldn't be insisting that the next person. He was also, remember, pro-lockdown. I mean, he's a globalist. In many respects, I find him anti-Christian, Godfrey. I think he's an absolutely awful man. But I have a particular bone to pick with him. And this was when he was the Dean of Liverpool. And he actually was accused quite seriously of failing to alert police over a paedophile who was at the cathedral, a man who was later convicted. And Justin Welby was approached by the worshipper about the abuse claims against a priest. And he took Canon John Roberts' side, who was then later convicted. So me personally, who's done a lot of work with survivors of child abuse, I find that particularly egregious, because are we not to, isn't the idea, suffer little children to come unto me? And if somebody comes to you and says something like this, are you not to at least listen to them, not, treat them as if they are somewhat insignificant? And that really was what people reported about him. But, he's risen through the ranks, hasn't he?
I had my regimental padre who left the Church of England to join the Greek Orthodox Church in point of fact, because he couldn't stand the Anglican Church a moment longer. And we got chatting about that. I'm talking about a couple of years ago now, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, because I stayed well in touch even after I'd left the army. But what was very interesting, he said, the trouble is with your Archbishop of Canterbury's, they're all much of a muchness. They're all broadly an academically based background.
Right there.
That's the broad thing, not quite true of Welby, but leaving that aside, he's an oil executive, bleach itself. And so we've got this kind of nonsense. But he said, the trouble is with your Archbishop of Canterbury, he's never been a parish priest. He's never been a parish priest. He climbs the greasy pole from committee to committee and brown-nosing the government of the day. And if anybody wants to know how your bishops and your archbishops therefore are selected, go back to Yes Minister and find the selection of one of the bishops. It's a whole program. It's half an hour. It's hilarious. There's only get down to 2 candidates, and Sir Humphrey says, well, he could be a courageous decision. And Hacker says, well, why is that? And Sir Humphrey says, well, he believes in God. And the Prime Minister Haggard says, well, shouldn't he? He's not quite as simple as that.
He believes in God. That's funny. But, you know, he's very much a Charles man, isn't he, Welby? I mean, this was almost inevitable, I felt, in some respects. You know, he's given pride of place in the coronation.
Yes, so they don't have the experience of being a parish priest. You don't work your way from the ranks. I mean, I started as a trooper in the army, and I finished as a squadron commander. I'd done the lot, although I was kept out of the sergeant's mess because I wasn't bright enough for the sergeant's mess. So they gave me a commission.
I doubt that. I think you're just a rebel. I think one of the reasons why any of these things happened is because you have a rebellious spirit to you, and that's what I like. I like that aspect of you. You know, you've always done that. Even when you were an MEP, you stood up and you were counted. I didn't even have to agree necessarily with your politics, but the fact that you were prepared to actually stand for something is what counts. That's what people see. These people lack a backbone. You know, Welby, he's a career religious man, isn't he? Like career politicians.
Yeah, it's funny. It makes you wonder, does it not? How, you know, what do they think? Where are they going? Does he see himself as a successful man because he went into the church after being an oil executive and became Archbishop of Canterbury? Does he judge success by the size of his hat?
Right. You're going to say something else.
You've got a very suspicious mind.
Naughty. Yes, you're absolutely right. What is that hat called, by the way? Do we know what it's called? They're always very peculiar. It's
Fisher of Men, which is why it's like a fish head.
Oh.
Yeah, that's why it's shaped. It looks, if you do it that way round, it's a fish head. He's a fisher of men, as it were. That's the derivation.
Really?
I'm not quite sure what the name. I ought to know that. I'm a bit cross with myself. I don't know.
Fascinating. No, that's fascinating. Yes, so he was an inevitable, wasn't he? Absolutely inevitable. And I'll tell you who else was an inevitable, and that was Professor John Edmonds, who did the modelling for lockdown. Okay, he's from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and it was said that his work was vital for the UK response to the lockdown. What do we think about that?
This is part of the culture of being fundamentally rewarding failure.
Exactly that.
Almost everybody outside the junior ranks of MBE and OBE, if you take those out of the thing and find all those civil servants and all those people, all those of the great and the good, are being rewarded for failure. And what they ought to do is they ought to dig out somebody at the School of Tropical Medicine or whatever it is, who was sending him memos saying he was wrong. There's the man who should get a gob.
Yes, there was somebody else actually on my list who I felt was rewarded for failure. You've just reminded me. I know, it was the woman who presided over the passport fracas. 700,000 passports. She was an advocate for working from home, and she's been given a gong. Let me find her name. Here you go. Abby Tierney. She was made Companion of the Order of the Bath. She was criticised for working from home while there were over 700,000 application backlogs of passports. And she's actually been given one of the highest honours in the awards. And that's exactly that, what you're saying, being awarded for failure. What is wrong with these people?
It's fascinating. And of course, it's the same in business. If you look at going back to Bob Ayling, for example, who totally destroyed British Airways and got sacked, quite rightly. I couldn't believe it. I think it was probably only 2 months later, wasn't it, when he walked into another £250,000 a year job.
Shocking.
People get sacked from the council.
Shocking.
Your chief executive of councils for making a pig's breakfast of it. 2 months later, they pop up in another council at the other end of the country on another £250,000 a year.
Yes.
And the woman in charge of NatWest Bank.
Oh,
Rose. Yes.
Dame Alison Rose. I think
Yeah.
she's Dame, isn't she? Yes, there you go. Another reward, another reward for failure. But you see, it's not so much that they are being rewarded for being outstanding in their field. They are being rewarded because, for me, when I looked at this list, there's 1,227 awardees. That's an astonishing amount of new establishment gatekeepers who will now be very sort of, protective of Charles and of the crown. And I think that's what's involved in a great deal of this, because once they have this honor, they're not going to go against the establishment, are they?
No, but they are establishment. They are the blob by definition. Right, Sonia, who do you like?
Well, I have to go to charitable concerns for this, and there are a number of people, and some of them I have had to go through tremendous pain in order to be able to achieve what they've done. And so I'm personally a fan of Diane Parks. Diane Parks, even by her own admission, her CBE is bittersweet. And she has done this incredible tireless work after her daughter, Joanna Simpson, was killed by an abusive ex-partner. And, Diana has received a CBE for services to vulnerable children suffering from domestic abuse and domestic homicide. And she co-founded the Joanna Simpson Foundation. And it is quite formidable work that she's done in highlighting the problems with domestic abuse, because the man who killed her daughter was a British Airways captain. Now, he was considered, a captain of his industry, and quite often there are misunderstandings about domestic violence and domestic abuse. There is this idea that it's often just like sort of working class yobs who get drunk at the pub and come home and beat up their wife. But what she was able to highlight is domestic violence has no class, has no career structure to it. It can occur to anybody. You don't necessarily have to be a weak individual to be on the receiving end of domestic violence. It happens in the most apparently neutral of families. And I think that she's done a lot to break down stereotypes of domestic violence. So I really support her work. And in the same vein, same with Gillian Milan. And Gillian Milan's daughter, you may remember, 21-year-old Grace, she was murdered backpacking in New Zealand. She was sadly strangled to death in a hotel in Auckland after meeting her killer, Jesse Shane Kempson, in December 2018. And Grace's mum, she set up the Love Grace Appeal, which was to empower victims, again, of domestic abuse. And also, I think what's particularly important about her work is so many young people, they go backpacking around the world. They're meeting complete strangers online in different parts of the world. And I think what Mrs. Milan did was actually just highlight the importance of really protecting yourself. Just because you're in another country, and it doesn't, you have to take the same precautions, if not more so, because these are alien environments to you. So I think both those women have done absolutely sterling work, and those are the kind of people that I want to see honoured, Godfrey.
Yeah, I've got some strong views on charities, and I'm glad you've highlighted those two extremely worthy cases. I have a golden rule, and I put it out. It's very popular. It went viral at the time when I did it 4 or 5 years ago, when I said, never give any money to a charity where the chief executive earns more than you do.
Bingo.
And I always feel that's a golden rule. And one of the things that annoys me, and again, it's all about political support. So you have your Oxfams, you have your Green Awareness, or whatever the charity happens to be. There's
Cancer Research UK, to me, is one of the most objectionable charities, because the CEO, and what's interesting is almost all the CEOs have all been given gongs after they've been the CEO of Cancer Research UK, and they earn obscene amounts. And don't forget, I'm actually completely opposed to corporate charities, because most of the money goes in the staff and in admin, but these are small charities, and that's why I support them. There should be no awards at all for the CEOs of major charities, because they're political appointees. Yes.
They normally got the job They're normally failed Liberal Democrat MPs or whatever they are. They're all sorts of ghastly people. And they say, oh, if we don't, I did a radio program up here a while ago in Yorkshire. They said, oh, well, you know, if you don't pay, you don't get the right people to head up the charity. And I said, no, look at the CVs of these people. Look at the CVs. They've never done a real job in their lives. And so what you're doing is actually funding an annual salary of maybe £150,000 plus, and probably a final salary pension scheme to go with it, would you believe? I know, because I used to work for a company that managed them. Did you know, for example, I know I'm going back a little while, for example, when I worked for the Warburg Empire, guide dogs for the blind couldn't spend their dividend income. There weren't enough blind people. There weren't enough. Yeah, they couldn't spend never mind the capital. The capital runs into billions. Your dividend income is hundreds of billions a year. There just aren't enough blind people.
That's insane.
I tried to donate. I've written several books, and I wanted to give all the royalties to my book from my book, one of my books, to the British Legion. No, I tell a lie. It was another one. It was the mental health military charity, but it doesn't matter because the point is the same. And I said, you know, if you but I want to do it. I expect you to advertise and try and help me sell the book. You keep all the money. You keep the money. Anyway, the negotiations protracted. In the end, I gave up, and I couldn't understand it because I wanted to give them money. I couldn't understand this. And then I was approached by the Victoria Cross Association, which is a tiny charity, all volunteers. And they said, Godfrey, you don't understand what most people don't understand. And almost nobody watching this program will understand or know. How could they? How could they know? And that is, the military charities do not know what to do with all their money.
That's insane.
They're awash with money. Help for Heroes, the British Legion, all these people. I speak as an ex-military man, and I've collected.
But there's so many homeless veterans. I mean, with like suffering serious PTSD, why are they not being taken care of?
You would imagine they would, but they're not. They're simply not. And so because they're incompetently run. And it's a sinecure for somebody. Let's say and the British Heart Foundation is a classic example. I used to be a regional dude years ago for the British Heart Foundation. I was doing Heart Foundation, obviously unpaid. I was a volunteer, a senior man volunteering, the businessman doing.
And like the CEOs.
Well, and the regional managers. One was a retired colonel, nice fellow, retired colonel, shiny shoes, and he said, I think he was earning something like, then I'm going back quite a long way, something like about £20,000 a year, which 20 years ago, 25 years ago, was quite a lot of dough to top up his colonel's salary or brigadier salary. He said, Godfrey, I call it my BMW money.
Oh.
And I said, well, you know, I've got people rattling a tin here, British Harbour, old age pensioners putting in £1 note, or whatever it happens to be, and you're funding your new BMWs every couple of years with it. Anyway, so I resigned, of course. And there's another interesting thing with the British Heart Foundation. They fund research. I used to buy with my money raised locally in Yorkshire defibrillators, because if you've got a defibrillator in the market square, it might save somebody's life.
Right.
He said, well, because that's not really, it's all good stuff, he said, Godfrey, but it's not really what we're here for. We're here for research. I said, show me some research. He said, well, we fund a reader at Leeds University. I said, what have you achieved? What does it all do? And I dug down a bit. It doesn't achieve anything. It just goes round and round. Now, you would think at the moment, wouldn't you? At this very moment, you would imagine that the British Heart Foundation would be saying, we are deeply worried and we are now digging right down to find out why so many young men are getting heart attacks completely in spite. Well, no, they're not doing that, are they?
It's too political. You're absolutely right. They're completely compromised. I made a film called The Business of Cancer, which is actually available on YouTube. And it looked literally at the business of it and how much money Cancer Research UK was making. To me, it's not a coincidence that Cancer Research UK, the acronym is CROOK. And I thought that was really interesting, but there was so much I discovered about it. And their researchers are compromised because it's all about the medical model, the scientific model. Now, there's lots of other ways that people have approached dealing with cancer, but Cancer Research UK aren't interested in looking at that. They're only interested in their scientists all around the country who they keep in their pocket, and it all works very nicely for them. And I'll tell you another series of charities that absolutely get my goat, and that is the BBC charities. They infuriate me. Comic Relief, as one perfect example. Comic Relief have for many years. Remember, Comic Relief. Their USP was always about starving African children. They used to send us images of, right? But what they were actually doing was sending pop stars off to these countries on their, first-class jets. And actually, the investments, there was a lot of money, and this is one of the biggest controversies about Comic Relief, is they invested money in like tobacco companies and various things like that. These are scandals that took place. People didn't give money to these charities to be invested in arms or tobacco, which is what's happened. Right, so it's scandalous what's being done.
The whole charitable game. When I was an MEP, you get an attendance allowance for turning up. So you get your pay, you get your business. Now you go and you sign on. It's 200 quid. 200 quid every time you sign on to go into committee or to make a speech, whatever it is. And I thought, well, I can't take that because I'm there to take the place apart. I'm here to actually give the place some stick. I can't have my cake and eat it, and I can't take the salary because I can't turn up here saying it's all a disgusting thing and put £70,000 a year in my pocket or whatever it was then. I said I can't do that. So I can't do that. I can't take the pension because it's non-contributory. So it is impossible for any of my constituents to get an index-linked pension without any form of contribution. It's impossible. So I can't take that. But what I did with my with my attendance allowances, I gave them to all local charities in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, North Lincolnshire, and there was one particular one which was rescue greyhounds. I'm a doggy.
Oh, one of my neighbours used to rescue greyhounds.
Well, the thing is, you see, Sonia, with me, I sent them the money via the CAF system. So it could all be clocked and audited and all the rest of it. So I'd sent it through the CAF system. And of course, it was down in Wakefield, and they said, oh, Mr. Bloom, can you come and do this? You're in the news and blah, 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 and come and help us with this, that, and the other. We're having one. I said, I can't come down. I'll send you money, but I can't turn up. I can't deal with it in my head, I'll come back with 15 greyhounds and my wife will kill me because I can't deal with it.
Oh, you old softy, you.
And the other one is the hedgehog charity locally here.
Oh, Godfrey, I had no idea of this side to you. This is wonderful. I mean, this is honourable stuff. It really is, because so many people, they're such hypocrites, aren't they? Especially politicians, as you say, they turn up, like the House of Lords as one example. I think the last time that I checked, they were getting £300 a day. That's more than some people have, that they're getting paid in a week. Right. And it's just extraordinary money. And generally, these people don't need it. They generally don't need it.
No, exactly. And I would argue, how many retired real executives, how many real ones who retire at 50, they've made their money. They might even have had their knighthood by then, I don't know. But their CB, they're real businessmen who would say, I will work for charity, I'll work for Oxfam, or I'll work for the Red Cross or UK or something. I'm very happy to do that. I don't want any income at all. I've made my money. I want expenses. So I can't afford to be out of pocket.
That's fair enough.
I don't need a salary. And they will bring expertise. But the people that've got them now don't have any expertise, and they're taking the salary. They wouldn't last 5 minutes if you or I interviewed them.
No, goodness me,
You've got this job, you're on this. They burst into tears and run away because they know they're crooks, and it needs exposing. So the golden rule to everybody listening to both our channels: If the chief executive is earning more money than you, they don't need your money.
Right. Right. I completely agree. I completely agree. And really, what I would say is try and stick to local. Try and stick to local charities, the smaller charities, because these corporate charities, when you actually see what percentage of your donations go into admin, that should wake you up to what's really happening.
Yeah, and Sonia, if you've got a chief executive on 200,000 a year, he will have his acolytes. It's not just him.
No, exactly.
There'll be another dozen, a couple of ranks down.
Exactly, because the thing is they all have to fall in line, because the moment that somebody sticks out, such as you saying, I don't want to receive the salary, then it makes it casts a cloud over everybody else who isn't being as honourable. So they all fall in line so that nobody sticks out. And that's what happens.
Our local one here is that I know some people at the Roundtree Foundation, because that was a big Quaker, as you know, a big Quaker charitable foundation. That is rancid. It's rancid with jobs for the boys.
Yeah.
The real workers they're trying to get rid of, the people who actually do something, they're trying to get rid of, and they're phoning around their old university mates to say, I've got a job for you, it's money for old rope. We don't actually have to do anything. Nobody knows what they do. Needless to say, over the years, the investments have turned it into a huge foundation. And they'll come on and they'll say, oh, no, Mr. Bloom, we do this, that, and the other. And I'll say, let's just sit down, come on interview. In fact, go and see Sonia. I'll get Sonia to interview. Let's have a look at your statement of accounts. Where does it all go?
I know.
Where does it actually go?
I would love to get in on those sort of things. Those things interest me. So who do you think is honourable enough that you looked at this list and thought, actually, yes, I can see that.
Well, one of my heroes is Tim Martin from Wetherspoon. Now, I'll tell you why. Because I've got a local brewer here I know. He rants all the time and, oh, no, Tim Martin, he's killing pubs and he's doing this and the other, he's selling cheap beer. Well, that is a very myopic view. Now, what you've got to understand with Tim, first of all, he came up the hard way, right?
Right.
He built it from nothing, which always attracts my attention and respect.
Same.
He built a big empire, unlike Amanda bloody Blanc, who inherited a civil service style organization, basically, and Dame Rose, or whatever, Alison Rose, who we just inherited a great blob of something. No, he actually built something. Your gongs for entrepreneurs should be people who built something from the base camp up and employ 40,000 people. That's it. Not taking over BP, right. All right, all that shit. Nobody wants to do that.
So, the mayor of the budget boozer, right? And
yes,
and
but it's more.
Yes, it is much more than that. One of my friends said, there was lots of things about Tim Martin that I don't agree with, his political views and everything, but I absolutely do support people coming up that way. I really do. And also, one of my friends said, of course, Wetherspoons deserved a gong, because it's one of the only places that you can have a full meal, you can drink all night and not have a heart attack looking at your bank account the next day. Right. And I think that's a fair point. You know, people can go out, they can enjoy themselves. My daughter, when she was a student, she was always, not always in Wetherspoons, not that kind of girl. But when they went out, her and her friends, they went to Wetherspoons often because, it's suitable for students as well as for somebody who doesn't want to spend an arm and a leg in the boozer of a night, but wants a night out.
Well, yes. And of course, politics with a small p. He has made it possible for a working class family to go out and have a Sunday lunch at one of his establishments and make it affordable.
That's right.
That's my kind of politics.
Yeah.
That's my kind of politics. That's what your old-fashioned socialists used to, they never did, but your old-fashioned Labour Party, old Labour, used to try and make that happen. They were looking out for the working man. They weren't all sort of creeps, middle-class creeps like Keir Starmer that Labour. But and I obviously never had a brief for old Labour. You wouldn't with my financial economic background. You just wouldn't, because I don't believe in that. But their hearts were largely in the right place. The old style 1950s, 1960s Labour
Understood. Party. I hear what you're saying, and I think there is a lot to. I actually think, in many respects, Tim Martin is, he's a success story, isn't he? He's a British in English success story. That's what he is. And I think that we need to honour more people who have come up the hard way, but we don't. As you say, it's often, you know, it's gongs for mates, you know, and political reasons. So you're really happy about him getting that, right?
I am, and he did something else which hasn't been fully, not really fully appreciated in my view, but this is a little bit of a personal thing. He's saved some wonderful Victorian, late Victorian, Edwardian buildings, which would otherwise have been hauled down. Most of his pubs, I mean, let's take the jewel in the crown is the Tunbridge Wells Opera House, which he fully restored.
No.
And made it into one of his pubs. He's made those sort of local banks, late Victorian banks. There's one in Leeds, there's one in my own, the Yorkshire and County Bank, which is a lovely with fluted ceilings, which was made probably at the turn of the century, turn of 1900 roundabout then. He's restored, and he restores everything to as it was, and he does it well. So all these buildings, he's a patron of architects, but of course. He's not fashionable, is he? So
no.
the Royal Society of Architects, or whoever they call themselves, should honour him. Why isn't he being honoured? Oh, no, because they're busy honouring people who put up brutalistic 1960s, 1970s concrete boxes in the middle of bloody Cambridge.
Right. To be fair, I didn't acknowledge him for that. I'm glad you've said that, because that puts a completely different spin on him, because we have some tremendous buildings that just need to be restored to their original beauty. I mean, some of our architecture is tremendous. I hate modern buildings. I've lived in a 400-year-old cottage, which was one of my favorite houses that we had. And I love old architecture because there's something divine about it. But I really wasn't aware of that side of him and hadn't acknowledged that. So I'm really glad you brought that to the fore. You're absolutely right. He's not fashionable in that respect.
Llandudno, there's a big, I think it's a bank. I can't remember what it was, or theatre or something. He's restored in Llandudno. Now, the point is, this is no secret. I'm not divulging something, I'm not coming out of the closet. I'm a piss artist. And I love pubs. I love Hampool beer. I love the crack. And if you want a good pub, the place to go is a pub where the artisans go after work at 4 o'clock. The butcher, the baker, the chippy, the sparky, the cab driver. That's where your crack is. That's where the crack is. And I've got one locally here, the Wheat Sheaf of my local town, which is a lovely, largely unspoiled little Georgian town. And I would like to transfer half of those people into the cabinet. Because if you want common sense, that's where you're going to find it.
Yes.
You won't find it with the home counties English middle class.
In their Westminster bubble.
All those people are beyond the pale.
Yes.
They're all hopeless. They're all stupid.
That's a good point. He is a British success story. You're absolutely right. I think that's a fair one. I really do.
Pop into any town, Sonia, when you're in any town, look out at Wetherspoon and go in, just clock the architecture. They're beautifully restored, and he hasn't really had full credit for that. As I say, he saved the trip out for the genuine hardworking working class family with their kids for a trip out. Get a big bucket of chips, for £1 or something like that. Now, I know I do go to Wetherspoon occasionally. Give you an example. I was in Bromley the other day for a rugby club reunion, and all my old friends, I was the boy of the side, all right, in the 1970s and 60s. I was the boy. All the old sods are still there in their blazers, pretty upright still. They're all great artists. They'd taken the sort of mezzanine floor at the Bromley Wetherspoon, all right, which wouldn't be my normal drinking hole.
No.
But it meant that we could have all that side, and of course all the women were sitting there drinking their vino, and all the men were yarning, talking bollocks over here. It was a 10-pint session. Ooh. They're 80. They're nearly 80, most of them. Some are 80. They can still swamp 8 pints back.
Wow.
They're all pensioners. And it's £1.30 a pint. Now, in London, you won't find a pint under £4.50.
£1.30? Wow.
Yeah, £1.30, £1.35, something of that nature. We could drink all bloody afternoon for about 25 quid.
Wow.
That isn't a social thing that needs, and that's why I always hated Boris Johnson when he closed the pubs. He said, pubs aren't an essential service. Well, not to Boris Johnson, but they are if you're a widow or a widower in a small town, and the only way you get apart from going shopping is to talk to anybody, is to go and sit and have a pint or a glass of wine in your local pub. Don't tell me pubs aren't an essential service. And
used
now
to be the heart of the community. When I grew up in Gloucestershire, in Cirencester, in a little village outside of it called Siddington, and our local pub, the Greyhound, was the heart of the community. And that was, as you say, where you heard the real wisdom, right, from people. And
if they did that, Sonia, if politicians went to the pub, well, they know what people are thinking.
Right, exactly. Get them down to Wetherspoons. Find out what the man and woman on the street have to say about something. That will give them a reality check.
I honestly believe that they are a very important role at pubs. And of course, now we're getting that business about the mental health that we got from lockdown. Well, they still don't get the flash to bang. They still think they did the right thing closing the pubs. And that's where Tim Martin was right. He said, don't close the pubs. You've got no more chance of catching a bug in a pub than you have anywhere else.
Did he say that? Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And he was right up front about that.
Right. Interesting.
There's a lot more to Tim Martin than cheap beer. A lot more.
Yeah, interesting. But isn't it interesting how what they choose to make front and centre about him, the fact that he was involved in Brexit, the fact that he had given money to the Brexit campaign, these are the only things that are primarily pushed about him. I didn't realise about the restoration of architecture. I think that's phenomenal. I didn't realise that he was actually sort of anti-closing of the pubs. I was completely opposed to that because, to me, I always associate pubs with, oftentimes quite inaccurately, with working class people. And I felt that, but not just that, the heart of the community, people coming together. And I felt that it was like anti-people. They didn't want us coming together and discussing what they were doing to us. You know, abusers don't like that, don't like people gathering together and talking about what is taking place. So interesting.
No, the establishment hate pubs. You leave your rank in the car park. You don't bring your rank into the pub. Your butcher, your baker, your surgeon, your barrister. They get, I spent my life in pubs. Everybody's view is as good as the next man. It's not like France or Germany, it's Herr Doctor or Herr Professor. Right. You don't have that in an English pub.
Right, we don't have that hierarchy.
Man is entitled to his opinion, and that's the beauty of it, and that's the beauty of the English pub. And it's an institution which is quite unique. I've been all over the world, I'm sure you have too. I mean all over the world.
Yeah, I think you've probably travelled more than me. Yes.
Anywhere else. You won't find it.
No.
Now, here's another interesting thing. You mentioned earlier about celebrities, actress and actor celebrities. I always find this very interesting. It is the actors and actresses that get their CBEs and their damehoods.
Yes.
If you drill down, you will find they are the ones who are most hostile to our institutions. Not all, but most. So your Dame Helen Mirrens, who's the guy that plays in Star Trek, guy with a bald head, Sir Patrick somebody or anything?
Oh yes, I know. He's horribly woke. What is his name? Patrick.
Patrick something anyway.
Yes, it will come. Somebody in the comments remind us.
Yes, and Emma Thompson. She got her Dame. She's on record saying, when somebody said, was talking about, it happened to be Brexit, but that's got nothing to do with the politics of Brexit. She said, oh gosh, she said, what a dreary, horrible little island England is. She lives in California, and she flew over, to save the planet first class with British Airways.
Right, exactly, bloody hypocrites.
Ian McKellen tearing pages out of the Bible. Yeah, he stood there a couple of years ago tearing pages out of the Bible because it was telling that homosexuality is a sin. I'm not going down that route. I'm not saying yes or no. I'm not saying the Bible's right. But if you are so hostile to the establishment, to the institutions, don't expect a bloody knighthood.
Right, exactly.
I met Liberal Democrat MEPs who got knighthoods, who have been Republicans all their life. But the Liberal Democrat had a whole sheaf of them. Who are we going to give them to? Well, we've got 4 Liberal Democrat MEPs who've been MEPs for 15 years. Well, let's give them. They all got knighthoods. They don't even believe in the system of knighthoods, but they still take one. I have never known one of these people refuse a gong on principle.
Right, I know somebody who did, and he died this year. You may or may not know him. Poet Benjamin Zephaniah, and he refused the gong. He said that, you know, he didn't support the system, and it would be absolutely hypocritical to accept one. And not that I'd ever be offered one, but you can absolutely guarantee I would never, ever accept one, because I do believe that you become absolutely compromised, and you then have to become an absolute upholder of the system. Whereas my job is absolutely about speaking truth to power. I mean, broadcasters, right? Broadcasters who got them this year. Tony Blackburn, I must admit, I have a bit of a soft spot for old Tony, 80 years old. He's done 6 decades of broadcasting. But the other broadcaster who irritated me, Godfrey, was James Whale. If there was a pro-vax lockdown advocate bigger than James Whale, I'd like to hear it.
I didn't know, has he got a gong?
Yes, he has. He got one. I can tell you what, he's got the MBE. And I know that he's battling cancer at the moment, but you know, what he's dealing with is irrelevant. And for me, it is what he has stood for. And he has been absolutely abhorrent towards people when it came to lockdown and vaccination. So yes, he's been awarded an MBE.
I've seen the clips. He is the most ghastly. I was on his program 3 years ago. I was being interviewed. He wanted compulsory custodial sentences for upskirting. You know, photographs, this kind of thing. And he can't listen. He can't listen. No. So he was interviewing me and he couldn't let me finish a sentence. And I was trying to explain, if you had a guaranteed custodial mandatory sentence, you could find a drunken undergraduate at a silly party doing a silly thing, going to prison for 2 years. Is that, you know, it's got to be a discretionary idea for doing things. Otherwise, the baby goes out with the bathwater.
I understand. And especially when, you know, the fact is that people who download child sexual abuse images hardly ever get custodial sentences, because judges do not believe that to be paedophilia or a crime, a sexual crime against children. And Eric Joyce, MP, was one example. He was convicted of having child abuse images in category 1, which is the highest that you can get, category A, and he didn't get a custodial sentence. So that's one example. And there was a man in Swindon who downloaded 2 million child sexual abuse images and didn't get a custodial sentence. So, you know, talking about custodial sentences, we really need, you know, to look at that as a perfect example. But I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. There are some people who will set out and they will put cameras in toilets so they can capture women, right?
Jail.
Right. Got you. I hear you. Right.
But not your drunken undergraduate. No, he did something silly.
I understand. Absolutely. Put him on a course, sort out his life or whatever. I absolutely get you.
I think, Sonia, you and I would both be very interested to have feedback. This is the one thing. We always welcome feedback. I know you do and I do. Constructive feedback. Please tell us what you think about the system, how it could be improved. Is it an anachronism? Does it need to go?
Right.
You know, what do you think? Because it's your system.
Yes.
If you're watching this clip, if you're watching these channels, it's your system.
Yes.
He's your king. It's your prime minister. Do you think he's doing you a good turn by ennobling some of the people that he is?
Yes.
You know, do you think these big charity people, do you think celebrities who actually are always bad-mouthing our country? You know, you've got the racing driver, Hamilton, Lewis in Monaco. Always bad-mouthing this country, doesn't pay any tax, he's got a knighthood. What do you think? I know what they think at the wheat sheaf.
And I'd like to also know, people watching this, who would you vote for? Whether it's somebody in your community, give them a name check in the comments. Even if they never come anywhere near a gong, give them a name check. Who do you think is worthy? I did notice, by the way, that Camilla sorted out her old pal Jilly Cooper, the author. Jilly Cooper, a long time ago, stuck up for Camilla about her being future queen. Well, she's been awarded this year. So finally, she's got what she was looking for. She was made a dame No, she's been made a Dame rather, and that was 2 decades after she had stuck up for Camilla. So these people have very long memories. But yes, I'm really interested to know, who do you think deserves to be honoured and acknowledged? I think that's a fair thing to say, really. And yeah, so Godfrey, I think we've had a good old dig down at some of these people. I did notice, by the way, that Liz Truss had nominated a whole pile of people who had given money to the Conservative Party donors. For example, Matthew Elliott, who ran the Brexit campaign, and Ruth Porter. And she then ignored some of the people. She was only, Liz Truss, how long was she in a PM for? I think she was 59 days, wasn't she? So, but yes, and also I'd like to know who people think are the most scandalous nominees, awardees, who shouldn't have got the awards at all.
Marvellous. I'll say just one thing, finishing up on Liz Truss. She has done less damage to this country than probably any other prime minister.
That's why they got rid of her.
Yeah, she done less because she was only there for 59 days.
Yeah. But I do, just as an aside, I remember talking to you and Alistair MacLeod about Liz Truss, and I don't think she was ever really a sort of WEFer, was she? I don't think she's a major globalist. I think that was part of the problem.
Which is why that's why they buried her. And the jury's still out, because we're still going down this route of higher and higher taxation. Right. And maybe she missed one trick from an economic perspective. She missed one trick. She wanted to cut taxation. She wanted to cut, all that was right. But what she left out, she had to cut spending. She should have added that. And she would have been bomb-proof. Even if the world globalists had got rid of her, she could have popped up in 5 years' time and said, I told you, we had to cut regulation. What are they fighting to do now? 6 months before the election, cut tax and cut regulation, but it's too late. Her day will yet come.
They've got plans, haven't they? That's why they had to put Rishi in, because obviously they want their CBDCs, their central bank digital currencies. Obviously, his wife has shares in Infosys, huge Indian tech company. So they want from Rishi this whole thing of AI, CBDCs, a cashless society, digital IDs, digital currency. So we know what they've got on the table. But Godfrey, I just want to say thank you very much for getting me involved in this. I've greatly enjoyed this. This is our alternative take on the King's gongs, and I'm not a fan of the King. And Godfrey, I think it is fair to say that although you are generally a royalist, you're not really a fan of this particular King either, are you?
No, I'm still a monarchist, just not the House of Windsor.
Interesting.
Bring back the Tudors.
Okay. I think on that note, I would like me personally.
Super duper.
Godfrey, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I mean, as I often say, you and I can be quite different characters, but I think there's something really interesting about bringing different people together. And I think that on some of the really important things we do agree on, and that is, you know, some of the madness that's taken place on these awards, for example. Both of us were opposing lockdowns and all of the insanity around that. And I think I think what we've seen over the last few years is good people coming together. So I want to personally thank you for getting me involved in this. I very much enjoyed it.
Well, Sonia, thank you again for joining me. I think it's been great fun.
It has.
I'd like to wish everybody on both our channels a very happy new year to you and your family.
Thank you.
And you never know, 2024 might not be quite so ludicrous as 2023. Let's hope not. So have a great year. And I think hopefully you'll see Sonia and I back on again, having a crack at something else.
For sure. Happy New Year, everybody. Take excellent care of yourself.
As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.